Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Inshallah, today we'll talk about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a topic that many students find one of the challenging topics in the course, and it's something that you can't really rush. So we have to take it methodically and try to understand the beauty that's behind it, more than just the jargon and equations that will suffice only for test taking, because it's one of the most fundamental biological processes, of course, and if you appreciate it in some reasonable detail, it is in fact a thing of beauty, so to speak. Today I like to primarily give an overview of photosynthesis, somewhat of an introduction, so when we actually do get to talk about the biological or chemical processes that make up photosynthesis, it becomes a little bit of an easier task for us. So today I want to talk about the four particular topics as a way of introduction, and they include, first of all, cast of characters, to give an introduction to some of the molecules that are involved in photosynthesis, so that when you do see them as part of chemical reactions, they don't look so alien to you. So that's one thing I like to talk about, cast of characters. The second thing I like to talk about is the basic reaction of photosynthesis, and as a way of introduction. The third thing I like to talk about is where and how is the sun's energy trapped? We all know that photosynthesis is a process where plants take or autotrophs take the energy from the sun and trap it and to produce energy-rich molecules. So where does this happen and how does it happen? How is this sun's energy, quote, trapped, so to speak? And finally, what is the big picture or the game plan of photosynthesis? That's the fourth introductory topic I like to talk about. So to begin with, the cast of characters. So this is carbon dioxide, and here the carbon molecule is represented by a black circle, and oxygen atoms are represented by the red. So carbon dioxide atom is carbon atom is black, and oxygen atom is red. And photosynthesis is the process where plants or autotrophs take carbon dioxide from the ambient air and convert it into glucose using water and light, of course. And this is a water molecule represented here. Red is oxygen and the white is two hydrogen molecules. So that's a water molecule. And this is oxygen molecule. This is two oxygens comprise an oxygen molecule. So when we breathe in oxygen, we breathe in as oxygen gas, which is O2. So plants take carbon dioxide and they take water and with sunlight, of course, and chlorophyll, etc., and they convert it into the energy-rich compound called glucose. Now this is a three-dimensional representation of glucose. Okay, so this is a 3D representation of glucose. This this bold white lines, they're supposed to represent lines that are closer to you. So this is kind of like a 3D representation where this is closer to you and that's farther from you. And these are carbon atoms in the glucose molecule. There's one that's labeled at 1, and there's 2, and there's 3, and there's 4, and there's 5, and there's 6. Those are the 6 carbon atoms, C6H12. The white is H's. C6H12 and O6, and there's 6 oxygen atoms in this. Now you should know the chemical formula for glucose, C6H12O6. Now, what kind of a biology student would we be if we don't know the molecular formula for glucose? It's one of the most fundamental things to know, inshallah. So this is a representation of glucose. So plants take carbon dioxide and water and turn it basically into glucose, which is a stored form of energy. That's not the only form of energy that plants produce. They also actually produce energy in the form of ATP, which you probably heard of before, and another energy-rich molecule, NADPH. Now, these are energy-rich compounds, okay, adenosine triphosphate, and the energy is actually in these bonds over here. And if you observe closely, and this NADPH is kind of like two ATPs in one, like flip side, where they're attached over here. You can kind of see over here, kind of like that. So two ATPs in one. So these are basically, I'm just simplifying that in a sense, but this is a cast of characters. I did not want you to be like inundated by chemical formulas, etc. We do talk about them. So as a way of slow introduction, this is how some of these things look like: carbon dioxide, water, oxygen, glucose molecule, adenosine triphosphate, and NADPH. These are the products of photosynthesis. So we've talked about cast of characters as a brief introduction. Now we should talk about the basic reaction of photosynthesis. Now, as you probably already know, photosynthesis is a process where plants or other autotrophs, take carbon dioxide from the ambient environment and water, and with the help of sunlight, energy from sunlight, and plants with the aid of chlorophyll, which traps light energy, then produce glucose and oxygen. So this is the basic reaction of photosynthesis: carbon dioxide, water, and with the help of light and chlorophyll produce glucose and oxygen. Now, we can write this in chemical formulas as a balanced reaction. So obviously you can't take one carbon dioxide. You have to have 6 carbon dioxide with the 6 carbons to produce a glucose molecule, C6H12O6. So this is the balanced formula for the equation for photosynthesis. 6 CO2s plus 6 water with sunlight and chlorophyll give you C6H12O6 and oxygen. Okay, now this is a must know. Okay, then you wonder, what's the big deal about photosynthesis, right? And why is it so important to us? Okay, you intuitively know it's very important because it is so emphasized. It must be kind of important. So why is it so important to us, right? Well, it's very important to us because we can't live without glucose and oxygen. I mean, think about this for a second, right? You know that when you take a deep breath, okay? When you inhale, you're inhaling oxygen from the environment, okay? And if somebody can't breathe, I mean, it's life-threatening in a matter of moments, right? So oxygen is very important. And the purpose of our circulatory system, of the heart and its paraphernalia, so to speak, the purpose of circulatory system is to take the oxygen that we breathe in and the glucose and the nutrients and deliver it to every single cell in the tissue. In other words, every single cell in our body, without exception, needs glucose and needs oxygen. Okay, why? Because that's how we get energy. That's how cells are able to do anything that they do. Like all cellular processes, all cells require energy for their survival. No glucose, no oxygen, no life. Okay, as simple as that. And that includes not us, but it includes all cells. So plants make glucose because it is essential for survival. That's where energy is stored for them. Okay, and so here's for us in a selfish way, because we're talking about ourselves, but plants don't make glucose to give it to us. They make glucose for their own selves, right? So in the lungs, for example, here's a representation of what happens in the lungs. This white little dot represents oxygen. When we breathe, the oxygen goes from the alveoli in the lungs, and it goes in the red cells. And here in this cartoon representation, the oxygen in the red cells take up the oxygen and become the red cells with lots of oxygen, or red, nice-looking red cells. So in lungs, oxygen diffuses into the blood, and in the tissues, that oxygen is delivered to the tissues along with glucose, nutrients, and everything else that the cell needs. and with that, the cell is able to extract the energy. Now let me tell you one more thing about this reaction. So cells take carbon dioxide and water and make glucose and oxygen. Okay. Now oxygen is so important because the energy is trapped in the glucose, but that energy is to be released. We need oxygen. Okay, so oxygen is kind of like the key that unlocks the energy in the glucose. Okay, it is so important. Okay, so not only do plants make glucose for us, they also make the product, the oxygen. That's like the secret key in unlocking that energy. And we take the energy from the glucose and we use it for our daily processes. Okay, as I suggested, plants don't make glucose so that they charitably, altruistically give it to us. They make it for themselves as a stored form of energy. But we, of course, eat plants, and that's how we derive our nourishment. So this is the basic formula for photosynthesis. So the overall chemical formula is this. Okay. So 6 CO2s, carbon dioxide per water with the aid of light and chlorophyll gives you glucose and oxygen. And in terms of the actual chemicals over here, I have outlined here. The thing is this, one thing I like to suggest at this stage is that you can't get too caught up in these fancy looking chemical formulas and not get the big picture. Right? If somebody comes up to you on the street and said, "Hey, what's photosynthesis?" and you start to get like, it's when plants, chlorophyll and sunlight and something, and I say glucose. I mean, it can't be like that, because fundamentally you have to think about this. Okay, if you get caught up in the nuances of this phenomenal process, but not get the big pictures, it's a bit sad, right? So you should be able to articulate. It's very simple. Say the plants take carbon dioxide from the air, and it's a dime a dozen of carbon dioxide in the air. We just take the carbon dioxide, it's everywhere. They take carbon dioxide from the air, and they take water from their roots, right? Okay, you water plants, right? So they take carbon dioxide from the air and water from their roots, and they mix it up with sunlight and have chlorophyll, and then they turn it into glucose, which is a stored form of energy, and they release oxygen. And oxygen is necessary to unlock the energy that's in glucose. That basic understanding you have to have, right? You have to master that which you have learned before you move on, so to speak, correct? So there's no point in my mind in studying the complex reactions of photosynthesis unless you have mastered the basic concept of photosynthesis, what plants do, and how remarkably beautiful it is, even at a very simple level like that. So this you have to kind of know. And not get caught up in the fancy details until you have mastered this basic equation. Now, that's not all what plants do. See, this equation is doesn't betray one very key concept. See, plants make glucose. That's fine, okay. But this is a stored form of energy. Plants also make along with this energy that they can use in an immediate basis. So they take carbon dioxide and water, and they make actually energy that they can use immediately, and that's the key concept. So we've talked about the cast of characters. I have spoken about the basic reaction. Then the third thing I like to talk about is where is the energy trapped, and how is the energy trapped. Okay, so this is what I like to talk about. Where does the energy come from in the first place, and how is this light energy trapped in all of this, correct? So I like to almost wish sometimes that the light, see, many times light is kind of written on top of the equation over here, but I kind of like to almost write it over here because light is actually a very important part of this reaction. It's the photons from the sun that travel across the space between the 93 million miles between the sun and the Earth, and they're the ones that carrying the energy that give the energy to the plants. Okay, so it's almost like should be part of the reaction over here. So ultimately, the energy comes from the sun. The other thing is, glucose is a stored form of energy. It's kind of like, okay, the plant makes the energy, and some of it uses for its immediate needs, and some of it puts it in the fridge. So the energy that it puts in the fridge is the stored energy, and that is glucose. So glucose is a form of stored energy. It's kind of like, okay, I'm going to put this in the fridge for later use type of thing. But for its more immediate use, okay, if it wants to immediate energy, plant uses ATP and NADPH molecules. So those are two molecules that I have introduced. So if plants really take carbon dioxide and water with light energy, they make these energy-rich molecules called ATP and NADPH for their immediate use. And if they want to store the energy that's in here, they convert the ATP and NADPH energy into a more stored form of energy, which is the glucose. So glucose is in a way the end product for stored energy. Now this is how we get energy from plants. So we don't get ATP and ADPH from plants. So our focus tends to be in this way. But from a plant's point of view, it doesn't make glucose per se. It makes ATP and ADPH, right? And uses it for its daily responsibilities. And then if it wants to store the energy, stores it in glucose for the winter days, so to speak, metaphorically and literally speaking. When the plant leaf falls for deciduous plants, they can't do photosynthesis because photosynthesis doesn't in those leafy plants. And when the leaves fall, they have to use up their stored form of energy. Okay, so this energy is stored here and it is stored here. This is immediately available energy and this is the stored form of energy. So in the ATP molecule, for example, where is the energy? The energy that's stored in ATP is over here, in the bonds between the phosphate, in between the phosphates. Okay, so this bond has lots of energy in it, and this bond has lots of energy in it. The bond between these two phosphates has higher energy than these two, but they're both high energy bonds. So the energy that comes from the sun ultimately is used to make this bond over here, to make these bonds. Okay, so the energy from the sun ultimately is used to create ATP from ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So this is the basic structure of ATP. As you probably already know, it has a sugar base, which is over here, and it has adenine over here. It's like a nucleotide base type structure, and the 3-phosphate group, and it is this bond over here that actually has lots of energy. And when ATP is being used, it breaks this bond and uses its energy to do whatever it wants to do, and uses energy using water. It breaks the bond using water, and therefore it's called hydrolysis of that bond. So that's where the energy is used in ATP and in the similar. Now, as I have suggested, this energy, if it wants to be stored, it stores in glucose form. So ATP and ADPH energy is converted into glucose and as a stored form. So glucose, in other words, is like a candy bar. It's a stored form of energy. Correct? Okay. But ultimately, as you know, the energy comes from the sun. The energy comes from the sun. So how does that even happen? What does the sun have to do with any of this? Okay, well, the energy from the sun, when we say energy from the sun, we talk about light energy. There are different forms of energy, right? Light is a form of energy. Heat is another form of energy, right? So light is a form of energy that's coming here from the sun, the cartoon representation over here. And if you take light and you break it up into different forms, as you know, the electromagnetic spectrum, the visible light and electromagnetic spectrum can be broken up into this rainbow of colors. Light, as you also probably know, has wave-like properties and also has particle-like properties. So you can look at light in particulate matter, and each little particle of light is called a photon. It's called photons. So photons are little packets of energy, and they travel like this, okay? So here's the photon, okay? It's going to go like this. So they travel in wave, and each photon here is a packet of light energy, okay? In other words, if something were to be struck by a photon, it would be energized. So that's where the energy is, in the little light packet. So the idea of photosynthesis is to capture that energy from the photon and give it to the little tiny electron that everybody's so familiar with, which reminds me of a joke. So a photon walks into a motel, and the guy at the front says, "Sir, should I take your bags? And the photon says, no, I'm traveling light. Ha ha ha. Okay, let's see. Back to the story. So the light energy that is in the photon is given to the electron. So the photosynthesis captures light energy exactly where? In electrons. So electrons are the recipient, so to speak, of that light energy. The little electron, which is represented here by this. So what happens is this. A photon strikes an electron, and the electron becomes energized. If you recall, there are different types of electrons, right? They're at different orbitals. The higher the orbital, the more energized electrons it has, right? So different levels of orbitals have different electrons with different energy, right? So the lower orbitals have lower energy, the higher orbitals have higher energy. How do they get those higher energy? Well, look at this. So when an electron is struck by a photon, like that, that electron becomes energized. So ultimately, what captures light energy? It's electrons. And this high energy electron is used to produce those high energy bonds in ATP and NADPH, which is subsequently converted into glucose. So who captures the light energy? Electrons. Okay? So, and that electron is used to make ATP and NADPH. Okay? So, and this reaction occurs on the cells of the plants in specifically in chloroplast. Okay, chloroplast, as you recall, is the organelle in plant cells. It looks green because it has chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is a molecule. Chlorophyll is a molecule that is so beautifully, exquisitely designed that when photons of light strike it, it is able to capture that light energy and give it to electrons. Okay, so chlorophyll is a molecule that is designed to capture light energy when it strikes. So this represents a chloroplast and the light striking chlorophyll molecules like that. Okay, so when an electron is energized after it's hit by a photon, we'll have to go back to it. Okay, now here's an electron. Okay, when it gets struck by a photon, it gets more energy and it's able to go into higher orbitals. So now this electron has more energy because it was struck by a photon. Now, if the electron gets lots of energy, it can even escape the atom, and that's what happens. It can even escape the atom, and that high energy electron is used to do all the beautiful things that photosynthesis does. Okay, we talked about the cast of characters. We talked about the basic reaction. We talked about where and how the sun's energy is trapped. Where is it trapped? It's trapped in the electron. And how is it trapped? It's trapped by using the chlorophyll, which is designed to capture that light, and this electron energy is used to make those high energy bonds. Okay. Now we should talk about the photosynthesis big picture, or the game plan for photosynthesis. Okay. Now photosynthesis is divided into two stages. Okay. Photosynthesis is divided into two stages. The first stage is called the light stage, and the second stage is called light independent stage. Now this is sometimes this is called the dark stage, which is the terminology. That's not very good, but it kind of sounds cool, right? So light independent stage, or the dark stage. Now, so this is the light stage, and that's the dark stage of photosynthesis. More properly stated, light stage versus light independent stage. What that means is there are two parts to photosynthesis: one that requires sunlight, and the one that is independent of sunlight. And these are reasonably complex processes to separate them into two parts like that. So there's part one of photosynthesis, so to speak, and there is part two of photosynthesis. Okay, in part one of photosynthesis, in the light stage, light energy is required to carry off the photosynthetic process. In other words, if there is no light, this whole shop would be shut down. Okay, so this first part of photosynthesis is dependent on light. It absolutely requires light. Okay, in this first part, plant takes water, okay, and light energy, and it converts that into ATP and NADPH, the high energy molecules as that we know. So the first part takes water and light energy and converts it into NADPH and ATP. And this process occurs in the chloroplast. So here, chloroplast is just one organelle in the plant cell. So there are usually a bunch of chloroplasts in the plant cell. So this reaction occurs in the chloroplast, okay? So in the chloroplast, in the first part of photosynthesis, light energy is converted into NADPH and ATP with water. And the byproduct of this first part is oxygen. So there are three things that are produced: oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. Now, if plants wants to use this, it can go use it to do whatever cellular processes it wants. And if it wants to store this ATP, then this ATP and NADPH go on to a second stage. In the second stage, these molecules combine with other molecules over here and in a cycle and to produce glucose. Okay, and this process requires CO2. So CO2 combining with NADPH and ATP, okay, with a whole bunch of molecules over here, results in production of glucose. Okay, so as you can see, these are two separate things. It's not one big reaction where CO2 plus water plus light, but this reaction is divided into different stages. In the first stage, or part one, ATP and NADPH is produced, and it's used for daily processes, and as it wants to store that energy, it is stored using what's called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is a process where this energy is turned into a more stored form of energy, and this process does not require light. There's no sunshine over here, right? There's no sunshine over there. So now, light independent reaction, sometimes this part, as I said, is called dark reaction. It doesn't mean it occurs in dark, okay? It just means it does not require. So this process occurs day and night, 24 hours a day. If the plant is making glucose, it can turn. If the plant is making ATP and NADPH, it can turn it into glucose at any time. But light reaction only occurs during the day because one of the key ingredients is light. If you don't have light, how are you going to make NADPH and ATP? It's like if you don't have meat, how are you going to make biryani, right? So light is a very key. Lamb biryani, that is. Light is a very key ingredient of the first part of photosynthesis. So, this is completely dependent on light, and with the second part is independent of light. Okay, so that concludes our introductory remarks, and after a brief pause, inshallah, we shall talk about first part of photosynthesis, which is light-dependent reaction. Until then, as-salatu wa-salamu ala rasulillah wa rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.